Welcome back to Take the Cannoli, the ultimate mafia podcast. Today we're going to take a look at the First Godfather. And by Godfather, I mean what we think of the term in popular culture today, Don Vito Cascio Ferro. He's often called the first capo di tutti capi, the boss of bosses. But that's just flashy headlines. A title that's only anointed by newspapers and nothing to do with how Sicilian mafia actually operates. However, in Cosa Nostra, money and power determine everything. While there may not be a de facto boss of bosses, influence, reach, money, or capacity for violence certainly rise you up the pecking order, and Cascio Ferro had it all. His father was one of the notorious campieri, an armed guard in the town of Bisacchino, south of Corleone and Palermo. Cascio Ferro grew into a handsome and charismatic man who had the ability to either charm or terrify in equal measure. He began to build a reputation as a diplomatic and approachable man who could grant favours and solve problems. Cascio Ferro knew the power of popularity, and he understood that fear wasn't the only tool to extract money. While many of his compatriots would bleed businesses dry, Cascio Ferro took a longer view on protection rackets. His view was that businesses left to thrive would deliver longer and steadier income. The pizzo, or pizzu in Sicilian, was entirely his invention. Businesses would pay just enough to wet the beak, but be left capable of operating. Now this has grown into something of a phenomenon. In 2008, the University of Palermo estimated that the pizzu earned the mafia over 160 million euros a year in Palermo alone, and something like 10 times that across the entirety of Sicily. As Cascio Ferro's popularity grew, he was recruited into the Fasci Siciliani, the Sicilian Leagues, which was a democratic and socialist movement fighting for the right of the working classes. Several historians assumed that this move were signs of political ideals of a young Cascio Ferro, but the truth is, it was purely business. Cascio Ferro was recruited to give teeth to the Fasci Siciliani and would soon turn on them when it became expedient to do so. The very man that recruited him, Bernardino Vero, would be gunned down in Cascio Ferro's territory less than 10 years later. By 1894, two things happened that would lead to Cascio Ferro fleeing Sicily and ultimately making his fortune. Firstly, the government in Rome had issued a crackdown on Fasci Siciliani and was rounding up all known associates. Secondly, the murder of Emanuele Notarbartolo, the former mayor of Palermo, had drawn a lot of attention onto Cascio Ferro, and the authorities were closing in. Sensing that his freedom was in danger, Cascio Ferro left for Tunisia. And it was in Tunisia that a new opportunity presented itself to Cascio Ferro. Seeing the huge trade and demand for livestock in Tunis, Cascio Ferro bought an impressive fleet of boats with the sole intention of shipping stolen cattle from western Sicily and selling them in Tunis. When he returned to Sicily a year later, his network of cattle rustlers and cross-Mediterranean shipments had made him extremely wealthy. With this newfound wealth, Cascio Ferro picked up where he had left off, infiltrating political circles. By calling in the many favours he was owed, he was awarded the position of emigration controller for the district of Corleone. Cascio Ferro quickly established a system that allowed mafiosi, who would normally be refused an emigration permit, with an unobstructed path to America. Political power and wealth were not enough for Cascio Ferro. He had an almost pathological need to have a finger in every pie. When the 19-year-old Baroness de Valpetrosa was kidnapped for ransom, Cascio Ferro was one of the conspirators. Sentenced to 2 years in prison, life was very different on his release. It became clear to Cascio Ferro and his associates that he had been placed under special police surveillance. Every move he made was shadowed by a constantly rotating team of officers, most of whom were from the mainland. By not using Sicilian officers and frequently changing the teams, they were impervious to bribery or threats. Sensing a change in his fortunes, Cascio Ferro decided he would now head to New York and begin calling in the favours of the hundreds of mafiosi he had helped to emigrate over the past 5 years. Cascio Ferro arrived in New York in September 1901 and was greeted by an anarchic and chaotic underworld. Cascio Ferro saw a criminal element that were just used as hoodlums to get politicians elected, but then gain no political advantage from it. Far too much infighting and focus on street territory without any obvious financial gain shocked Cascio Ferro. He saw a wild and ill-disciplined criminal fraternity with no focus. That was about to change. Cascio Ferro knew that one of the men he had helped illegally leave Corleone had established a gang, Giuseppe Morello's 107th Street Mob. It's no coincidence that months after Cascio Ferro's arrival in New York, that the Black Hand began appearing. Now, the Black Hand was actually a Camorra import, not Sicilian, but the Morello gang began to excel at it. Typically, a victim is sent a letter demanding payment with a skull, knife, or other threatening image drawn on it. The letters were always signed off with a Black Hand. Now, the Morello gang included another earner alongside the demand for money. They would also insist that an amount of counterfeit money be purchased. Morello had been a successful counterfeiter in his native Sicily, and with Cascio Ferro's urging, took up his old profession. Cascio Ferro also brought with him the pizzu, and opened up another solid revenue stream, explaining to his new colleagues that you have to skim the cream off the milk without breaking the bottle. Don't throw people into bankruptcy with ridiculous demands for money. Offer them protection instead. Help them to make their business prosperous. And not only will they be happy to pay, but they'll kiss your hands out of gratitude. 8 months after his arrival in New York, Cascio Ferro had turned a street gang into the beginning of the first crime family of New York. Even when the vast counterfeiting operation was raided and Cascio Ferro arrested, he produced an alibi out of nothing and walked free. Cascio Ferro seemed untouchable. Over the next 2 years, the Morellos' power grew. Their counterfeiting operation ran as far as Pittsburgh and Washington, with growing links down to New Orleans. But it all came to a head with the murder of Benedetto Madonia, a Morello associate and the brother-in-law of one of Morello's low-level counterfeit pushers. Madonia was enraged at both his brother-in-law's arrest and the seeming disinterest from Morello. Madonia sent $1,000, a fortune in 1903, to help his brother-in-law's trial. But Morello pocketed the money. Madonia, who was living in Buffalo at the time, demanded a meeting with Morello and travelled to Manhattan to retrieve his money. That was the last time he was seen alive. His body was discovered mutilated in a barrel, one of the growing numbers of barrel murders that were appearing over Manhattan and New York City at the time. The difference here was that Madonia was under Secret Service surveillance for counterfeiting. Agents were able to place his last whereabouts in a Morello-controlled restaurant, where he was seen with Morello boss Ignazio Lupo and an enforcer named Tommaso the Ox Petto. All of this would eventually lead to Cascio Ferro's door. A tenacious New York City police detective, Sergeant Joseph Petrosino, the NYPD's first ever Italian speaker, brought with him the knowledge of his native Campania, and unlike his fellow detectives, could untangle the webs of organised crime with particular ease. His investigation led directly to Cascio Ferro. Once again, sensing impending danger, Cascio Ferro fled, first to New Orleans, only to be trailed by Petrosino, forcing him to return to Sicily. On his return to Sicily in 1904, Cascio Ferro, now even more wealthy, embedded himself once again in politics. Newspapers of the time painted him as a philanthropist with impeccable manners and marvelled at the respect he commanded. But the NYPD's Joseph Petrosino would soon be back in Cascio Ferro's world. Sent on a fact-finding mission to review Sicilian criminal records and help deport mafiosi, Petrosino arrived in Palermo in 1909. His stay would be a short one. On the day he arrived in Palermo, Petrosino was invited to meet a secret informant that evening in the Piazza Marina. At the exact same time, Cascio Ferro was having dinner at the home of the politician Di Michele Ferrantelli. Cascio Ferro is said to have excused himself, taken his host's carriage, and after arriving in Piazza Marina, shot Petrosino in the face. Witnesses claimed there may have been 2 or maybe even 3 shooters. But as in most cases in Sicily, witnesses do more to confuse than confirm. Cascio Ferro was arrested and promptly released when his alibi became known. The murder of an NYPD officer on foreign soil sparked outrage across America. But it was all in vain. No criminal charges have ever been brought for the murder of Joseph Petrosino. For the next 17 years, Cascio Ferro's power seemed untouchable. He enjoyed a lavish lifestyle and continued to wield power over a large section of western Sicily. During this time, he was still influencing the American Cosa Nostra. Perhaps his biggest influence was giving the young mafioso Carlo Gambino his blessing to leave Palermo for the United States. The young Gambino was said to have worshipped Cascio Ferro and modelled his behaviour on the charismatic Don. Cascio Ferro's final challenge would be one even too large for him to overcome. The rise of fascism in Italy had seen Mussolini determined to crack down in Sicily and bring it into line with the rest of the mainland. The man tasked to break the mafia was the Iron Prefect, Cesare Mori. Mori suspended the rule of law across Sicily and proceeded to round up thousands of mafiosi, most of whom would be imprisoned on trumped-up charges. But by far the greatest prize was the capture of Cascio Ferro. On being sentenced, Cascio Ferro reportedly told the court, "Gentlemen, as you have been unable to obtain proof of any of the numerous crimes I have committed, you have been reduced to condemning me for the only one I never committed." Cascio Ferro would spend the rest of his life behind bars. There is a lot of uncertainty when and how he died, somewhere between 1940 and 1945. Some reports say he died of natural causes. Some say that when the Allies invaded Sicily, he was abandoned by guards and died of dehydration. Another popular rumour was that he had been moved to a prison in Naples and was killed during an Allied air raid. Just as in life, his death is shrouded in legend and rumour. But one thing is certain. Few men can claim to have been so instrumental in what Cosa Nostra became in the 20th century. Next time on Take the Cannoli, we're going to go back to New York City and take a longer look at the 5 Points Gang and the spread of Cosa Nostra across America. Until next time, ciao tutti.